Sally Caldwell. My name is Sally. I'm the Adult Services Librarian here at Trone Memorial Library in East Berlin, and you are signed into the Mystery Author Discussion. Just a couple of housekeeping things. This is a webinar, and so if you would like to ask questions, we encourage you to ask questions of our presenters today, and you can type them into the chat box for us to share with the authors. So we have, this webinar is being recorded, just so everybody knows, and you will be able to replay it on our YouTube channel at adamslibrary.org. Special thanks to Deb, hi Deb, from the Mechanicsburg Mystery Bookshop for helping us put this together this afternoon. And a special thank you to our three authors who are all from the local area, that's Pennsylvania, Maryland, and New Jersey. Sean Riley Simmons is an Agatha and Anthony award-winning author and editor. She's written 7 novels in her Red Carpet Catering Mystery series, and over 20 of her short stories have appeared in various anthologies. She serves on the board of Malice Domestic and is an editor at Level Best Books, and is a member of Sisters in Crime, Mystery Writers of America, and Crime Writers Association, and International Thriller Writers. She lives in Frederick, Maryland.
Hi.
Thank you, Sean.
Thanks for having me.
Amy Reed is the USA Today and Wall Street Journal bestselling author of historical, cozy, and gothic mysteries. A former practicing attorney, Amy discovered a passion for fiction writing and has never looked back. She has so far penned 14 novels, including 3 standalone gothic mysteries, the Malice series of gothic novels, the Juniper Junction Holiday Cozy Mystery series, and the Cape May Historical Mystery Collection. In addition to writing, she loves to read, cook, and travel. Amy lives in New Jersey and is a member of Mystery Writers of America and Sisters in Crime. You can find more out on her website, and we're going to have all the websites in the chat available as links. Thank you, Amy. Maddie Dalrymple is the author of Lizzie Ballard thrillers, beginning with Rock, Paper, Scissors, the Anne Kineer suspense novels, beginning with The Sense of Death, and the Anne Kineer suspense shorts, including Close These Eyes. Maddie lives with her husband and their dogs in Chester County, Pennsylvania, and enjoys vacationing on Mount Desert Island, Maine, and Sedona, Arizona. And these locations provide the settings for her work. Maddie is a member of Sisters in Crime and International Thriller Writers. So again, thank you all very much for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so I will start out with a question, and I'm hoping we can just keep discussing things as they come up. When and what did you start writing? Did you know you were a writer from a young age?
You should start.
You want to call on someone?
Sean, you want to start?
Sure. Yeah. No, I don't want to jump in if someone else.
Just jump in.
Yes, jumping. Yes, I decided I was going to be a writer when I was 8 years old. I just came home and that was the thing. That was what I was going to do. And just said, I'm going to be a writer. And my mom was very supportive and she said, all right, sounds good. Let's do that. So I started writing, terrible things early on. Slowly got better. I think I wrote a very short story about a dinosaur. I think I was 10. But a dinosaur, and there was a dinosaur egg, and my whole family, there's like 12 people in my family, and everybody had a speaking part in this very 3-page story. So it sort of moved on from there, and then got better and better. I just kept trying and practicing, and then I won Best Creative Writer when I graduated high school. I got a little plaque and a check from my English teacher, which was very nice. And then I went off to college and I pursued writing. That was what I always wanted to be, obviously. And my sophomore year, my creative writing teacher, I was writing a lot of short stories because that was the assignments. And she pulled me aside after class one day. And initially I thought, oh my God, she's mad at me for something because I just always have that going on. But she wasn't. She said, I think you're ready to write a novel at this point. And I was 19 and working my way through school, working 2 jobs, working at a bar all night. And I'm like, well, when am I going to have time to do that? Plus, I haven't lived long enough to write anything good because I'm studying Shakespeare and Faulkner and all that stuff I was an English major. but I always remembered that. And I thought, okay, I think I have something going here. Because I just had a lot of early on encouragement from a lot of really strong women actually in my schooling, and my mom and everybody. And that was it. So then I moved to New York, and I said, I'm going to be a writer. I'm going to move to New York. It's so romantic. And after I graduated, and then it turns out I really needed to pay my rent and eat and things like that. So I got a job in marketing because, marketing is a good job for English majors because it's persuasive speaking, it's writing, it's convincing people through words to buy stuff from you. So I figured, I'm writing still. It's just for money. And so I did that but I was, wanted to be a fiction writer, and I kept that burrowing in the background as I made money doing marketing things and working for big companies and traveling. And then I had my son, and I was working at the Washington Post company, still marketing, still selling advertising and things. And I said, well, I'm just going to stay home with him, and I'm going to start writing. And I start writing full time. And then I turned into a writer. That was it. Now I write full time. I'm going on 11, 12 years now writing full time fiction. And I'm very, very lucky that life turned out that way for me. So I'm very grateful. But that's how it started. Very early, ended up good.
I love that. I love that. I mean, that's so great that your mom was so supportive and that you had teachers that were so supportive. I just love that.
Thanks. Yeah, it was nice. I'm very lucky. I mean, you have setbacks and downfalls and doubts and, like, am I even good enough? Like I had that going on for a long time. And then, you still kind of have that all the time. I think you still have like, is this going to be good? I'm not sure. I think we all have that probably, or maybe it's just me. I don't know.
No, it's definitely not. I get to a point in every book where I'm like, this is the worst dreck I've ever seen in my life. and then the more I edit, I feel like, okay, all right. And then by the end, I'm like, I like this.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
Maddie, do you want to go next or you want me to go next?
You should go ahead.
Okay. I don't know how old I was when I decided I wanted to be a writer, but it's really funny because it wasn't long ago that an old friend of mine that I graduated from high school with sent me something she found cleaning out her attic. And it was a piece of paper. It was an old assignment, and she and I had been paired up. We had to interview each other. It was like, what do you want to do when you grow up? And all kinds of like personal information. And she had recorded my response as saying, I want to be either a lawyer or an author. And I've done both, which is
so cool.
And I have to say, being a writer is 10 times better than being a lawyer. There's, there might be a couple of lawyers out there who disagree, but I think for the most part, most lawyers would agree with that. That was, it had to have been middle school. And I do remember there were a couple things I wrote during middle school. One of them won a contest that it was like the first stage of a contest to see who would get to go to Europe with Nancy McKeon from The Facts of Life. I'm like, I want to do that. But I never did go to Europe with Nancy McKeon. But I did win sort of like the first stage of that contest. And then I do recall writing a story. This was when I was before middle school, I think, a children's story that was later adapted for a radio program that the radio host took to China to start to teach Chinese children English, which is pretty cool. And I don't know whatever happened to it.
Cool.
But I don't know, it was just kind of a neat thing to tell people. And then
you broke into the international market really early.
I did.
Wow.
I did. In a language I don't speak, which is cool. And then I went to college. I actually went to college to be a veterinarian. That obviously didn't work out. And then I went to law school and I practiced law for a while. And it was when I had my kids too that I, decided I'm going to stay at home for a while, and didn't take much of that for me to decide, wow, I need a break. I got to do something. And so there was a local library had a workshop, a 3-night workshop that was run by an author by the name of Annie Kelleher, who used to write fantasy. She has since passed away, but she she used to spend summers in the part of New Jersey where I live. And this was sort of her way of giving back to the community, was to have these workshops. So it was the 3-night workshop, and my in-laws babysat, and I ended up going to 2 nights because the third night my son had ended up in the emergency room. But anyways, the 2 nights, it was great. And that was when I decided, like, I've had enough practicing law. I want to write fiction from now on, because it just fascinates me. And I've done that ever since, and I love it. Your
Wow,
turn.
great. Maddie, you're up.
So I got a later start. I mean, I probably wrote stories when I was very little, but I mainly started writing in college. I wrote some short stories that I would then pass on to my father, who was a short story writer. He had stories published back in the 50s in Collier's and Cosmopolitan. And I actually named my publishing imprint after his pen name, which was William Kingsfield. So my publishing imprint is William Kingsfield Publishers. But I wrote some short stories, but I got a couple published, but nothing that really, gripped me to stick with it. And then I think I just spent many, many, many years reading. And that was really my best training for finally having an idea that I felt was worthy of a book, which was in 2011. And worked on that. Also had the benefit of a local class taught by Mary Jones, a Philadelphia area thriller and mystery writer. And that book ended up becoming my first Anne Kineer suspense novel, The Sense of Death. And so I was writing follow-ons to the Anne Kineer series, and also a second trilogy called the Lizzie Ballard Thrillers while I was working a day job in the corporate world. I was a project manager. And then in 2019, I had an opportunity. They were restructuring the company, and I had an opportunity to take a severance package, which I did, and was able to start focusing full-time on writing and publishing, because I also got fascinated with the business side, the independent publishing side. And so, since 2019, I have been writing and publishing full-time. And I also have a nonfiction platform called The Indie Author. And I have a weekly podcast and 2 nonfiction books, one about short fiction, what you can do business-wise with your short fiction, and also one about podcasting for authors. So that's kind of my origin story of where I got here.
Wow. Thank you. Well, I know that you all, well, I shouldn't say you all, but there's lots of different genres, and several of you write several different genres, which I'm curious about what the difference is. Well, maybe in the writing process between cozies or gothics, and what your favorite is and why when you write several. Anybody?
I'll actually take a crack at this, because this is something that I'm kind of hoping that maybe participants or my fellow panelists will weigh in on. Because when I wrote my first book, The Sense of Death, it turned out to be, I didn't go into it with a genre in mind, but it turned out to be a suspense story, meaning that it's not a whodunit. It's a, will he get away with it? So you see a murder happen right on page 1, well, not page 1, page 9, maybe. And then the story is about, will the killer get away with a crime? Will justice be done? And then what price will Anne Kineer pay for getting involved in this crime? And so that was great. And so then I wrote the second one, again, not really going into it with a specific genre in mind. And that turned out to be more of suspense and mystery, but not a murder mystery. And then books 3 through the 5th one will come out next month in April. Were all true murder mysteries, fairly traditional. The murder happens off scene. You're guessing who done it through the book. And it's been a bit of a struggle. And I'll say before I jump into the rest of that my Lizzie Ballard thriller is strictly thriller. It's a, will the protagonist survive for the next book? But the Anne Kineer series has really evolved over time, and it kind of happened naturally. It's not something I would have picked to do if I had planned ahead, but you've got to write the books that are in your head and your heart. And so now I'm struggling a little bit with how to position the later books, because if people start out and they see that it's a suspense, if they think it's suspense, they might be surprised as they go on, or if they start with the first one thinking it's going to be mystery, then they're not going to get the whodunit. But so I've been a bit all over the place because I don't start out a book with a genre in mind. I write the book and then I retrospectively look and see what genre it's falling into.
Yeah, I kind of that happened to me, my first novel, a little bit, because I didn't know what I was doing. I just sat down, I'm like, I'm just gonna write a book today. So I sat down and started writing. I was like, had in mind I was gonna write a mystery of some type, but I wasn't clear like what the rules were on like cozy, traditional. I mean, I kind of knew, but I had never written one, so I just sort of just started writing. I'm like, this is what I feel like writing, and I'm just writing it. So I finished the first book, and my sister also, when she was 8 years old, decided she was going to be a chef, and she went to culinary school and graduated and top of her class, and then she was a fellow at a culinary school, and then she got a job working on movie sets. So she cooked for a lot of celebrities in New York and LA. So when she was in New York, I would go and help her out and be her sous chef and hang out on the sets and stuff. And then we both worked on a movie here in the DC area several years ago. So I thought, well, that's what I know. I'll write about that, because I've seen a lot of culinary mysteries, but I haven't seen a movie set culinary mystery that I knew about. So I thought, well, there's my new thing, my new spin on it. So I'm writing this away, and then I got an agent and a publisher, and I thought I was writing a book about, movies. I thought, oh, this is a movie book, it's a mystery about movie sets. And my publisher was like, this is a great culinary mystery. I'm like, oh, right, culinary. I didn't know. So like, we think we should market this as a culinary mystery. I'm like, oh, that makes a lot of sense, because she's a chef and she's cooking all the
Yeah.
So I stumbled right into that. I wrote a culinary mystery without knowing I was writing a culinary mystery, because that's how I didn't know. And that's how I became a culinary mystery author, by accident.
I started out writing Gothics, and not Gothics in the sense that there are vampires or monsters or really anything paranormal at all, but more of a suspenseful, atmospheric type of Gothic story, like Mary Stuart or Daphne du Maurier. She is like a classic Gothic mystery author. And so those were the books I liked to read most when I was growing up. Like I started out with Nancy Drew, like the Nancy Drew mysteries. They're my, they're my favorite childhood mysteries. But as I got a little bit older, I started to get into the more Gothic stuff. And I thought, that's really what I want to write. And so I wrote the first 6 books I wrote were Gothic, although the fifth book sort of took a mystery that happened, not a mystery, but a story that really did happen centuries in the past, and I incorporated it into a modern mystery. And it was while I was working on these mysteries over several years that I got really interested in cozy mysteries, because I started reading a lot of those. I was trying to stay away from reading the Gothic mysteries while I was writing them. So I started reading cozy mysteries instead. And I thought, oh, geez, I really like these. I should write these. So then I started my holiday cozy mystery series, which right now there are 5 books in the series, and I'm going to finish up with the 7th book, and I'm almost done with the 6th one. So it starts out, it's a Christmas book, and then book 2 is the 4th of July, and then 3rd is Valentine's Day, and 4th is Halloween, and 5th is May Day, which isn't really much of a holiday in the United States, but they do celebrate it in lots of other places around the world. What I didn't think of when I was writing it was that these books come out like in a certain order, and each of them can be read as a standalone, like most cozy series, but there's a story arc that continues through each book. There's a thread that continues. And so it never occurred to me, like, people are going to want to read in year order. Like, they're going to want to start with, Valentine's Day, then July 4th, and then, or May Day, then July 4th, then Halloween, then Christmas. And I just came out in completely different orders. And so I came out with what worked for me. And so marketing that has been kind of a challenge, but because, the first book in the series is a Christmas book. So, you're constantly marketing that first book in a series And who wants to read, who wants to be told to buy a Christmas book, in May or in June or whatever. And then at that point, like you can't market book 6, the Thanksgiving book, because people haven't read the Christmas one yet. So it was really stupid. But I've really enjoyed writing that series. And then my husband said, hey, you should write a series set in Cape May where we live. So then I said, okay, I'm gonna try my hand at historical. And I do love that, but I find that that's the hardest of the 3 for me to write. So that's what I'm working
Is that
on.
because of all the research for historical?
I think so. I think that's what the research is kind of my favorite part of writing any kind of book, because they all require research of some kind or another. But the historical mystery, you really have to get certain elements right, because there are people who get very angry when you don't get things right. So you have to be really careful. There's a fine line you have to walk between sort of creative license about what happened in the past and what really did happen in the past. So it's fun though. I enjoy it a lot.
I did write one book that had a historical backstory. There was a series of fires that took place in 1947 on Mount Desert Island in Maine in October of 1947. And that's the backstory of one of my books. But what I do find is that for example, the book that's coming out next month has the backstory of a winery. And I did a lot of research into vineyards and wine and wineries and everything. But there's always a last pass where I actually strip out some of the detail, because even if it's right, I think it can sometimes be a distraction. Like people go, I wonder if that barrel really was made in Hungary. And I don't want them like tempted to go Google Hungarian wine barrels. I think at some point the level of detail is good to know, but you don't have to put everything that you know about it into the book. It can be a distraction.
Yeah,
That
I
sounds
agree
like
with
really, really tough research. I'm glad you had to go through that. The wine research.
that.
Somebody's got to do it. I took one for the team.
I think it sounds great.
Yeah, absolutely.
So Amy mentioned a couple of her influences, other authors, Nancy Drew and Daphne du Maurier. Did you have any particular influences, authors or people in your life as far as your writing, Sean?
A ton. Well, Nancy Drew for sure.
Yeah.
So we're sisters on that, because I would get a new one every week because that was in the budget. I could get one new book a week, so we would go to like the Walden Books in the mall, and God forbid they didn't have the next number that I was up to. So I get home on Saturday afternoon and I would start reading it. My mom said, you need to slow down because you're not getting another one until next Saturday. I would be done like by Monday. And I finished it so fast. So then she would just hand me an Agatha Christie and say, read this. She was an English teacher. So I'd read Agatha Christie, and then I read all through the Golden Age, Naomi Marsh, Daphne du Maurier, all of them. I just, because she would just always have these paperbacks laying around the house. I mean, every shelf we didn't do a lot of TV. We watched, we read a lot of books. So that was what I did to not be bored, because I was a child of the, 80s. But so those were my early on. And then I never will forget when I discovered Janet Ivanovic, because I would just like be in my bed laughing out loud, and she would yell up the stairs, like, what are you doing? Like, what are you laughing at by yourself? Are you going crazy? Because I would just be laughing out loud at her books. So I love the humor along with the mystery. And I just love her. And then Sue Grafton, major influence. And I was lucky enough to get to meet her, and she actually knew my name. And I said, well, okay, I'm done now. I could just be over life. I'm good now. I could just end everything, because she recognized who I was, and I'll never get over that. And she was a huge influence on me growing up, and then as an adult as well. So those are my pillar ones. And I love Stephen King. When I just was obsessed with Stephen King at way too young of an age. So yeah, Mom was weird. She's like, read whatever you want. So she let me get an adult library card when I was really young, because I'd already read through everything in the children. It was just too beneath my level of reading, I guess. And she said, yeah. And so the librarian called, is she allowed to read Christine? And she's like, yeah, it's fine, whatever. So that's why I'm weird. That's why I'm like this. Sorry. It's all Mom's fault.
That's great. How about you, Maddie?
Well, when I was growing up, I read a lot of Sherlock Holmes and Rex Stout. And I don't know that they were stylistically a huge influence. I mean, they were an influence in the sense that they were mystery, and it was something I enjoyed, and then something I enjoyed carrying forward into my writing life. But it's easier for me to think of, I don't know if these are influences because I read them after I started writing the books, but in all my books, there's a theme of what happens when an extraordinary ability transforms an ordinary life. So it's normal life with one thing tweaked. And in the Lizzie Ballard thrillers, the tweak is that Lizzie, who starts out in the first book as a young girl, and then through most of the series is in her late teens, has an ability to do bad things to people when she's angry. I won't say what, because that would be a bit of a spoiler. But everything else is, as normal. And then in the Kineer books, the one thing that's different is that Anne can sense spirits. So she has a business that's based on that's run by her brother. It's like a consulting business. It's kind of like if you were to hire a CPA, except you're hiring a spirit sensor. So I wanted it to be very normal, except for just tweaking that one thing. And the books that I've read that I have really enjoyed, that I think retrospective, in the middle of my writing career, have become more of an influence. The two that I can think of are Charlene Harris, but not Sookie Stackhouse. But she has another series called the Harper Connelly Mysteries. And that is so freakishly similar to the Anne Kineer stories that I'm glad I have evidence that I wrote my books before I read hers, because it's about a woman who can sense dead people in a business run by her brother. But in this case, it's just the Harper Connelly, the Charlene Harris character, can sense what happened in the final moments of a person's life, and that's how she solves the mysteries that she's confronted with. So it is a little bit different. But another book that I really enjoy is Ben Ivanovich's Rivers of London, which is kind of like a standard British police procedural, except there's magic. So magic is kind of this thing that is kind of bad form to talk about, but it's out there. And so the London Metropolitan Police Department has this small branch that is devoted to crimes that involve magic. So those are two examples of the kinds of books that I read. And I think, oh man, I hope that I can draw a world that is as compelling and immersive and enjoyable as Charlene Harris has with her books, and Ben Ivanovic has with his.
I know, I think, Sean, you alluded to this about not necessarily knowing what you are writing when you have an idea for a story. So my question is, do you have the whole plot in mind when you start to write your book or story? Do you want to start?
No, yeah, no, I never do. I'm terrible with that. I just start going and I just go. I guess there's two schools of thought, or there's pieces of different things, but there's pantsers and then there's plotters, they say. In writing, the community of writing, you can hear people say, I'm a pantser, which means you fly by the seat of your pants and you sit down and you start writing. Like whatever takes you, you're just going that way. So I kind of subscribe to that, because the first book I just wrote organically. I just didn't know what I was doing. So I tried to write a chapter a day or half a chapter a day, whatever it was, between nap times with my baby. And he would wake up like, all right, we're done writing for today. I got to do lunch and stuff. So that's how I wrote that one, not a plan. So the second one, at that point, I had a publishing contract and an agent, and I thought, I'm going to be nicer to myself. I'm going to be way more professional. I'm going to do an outline. I'm going to know what I'm doing. I'm going to sit down every day, because I am kind of OCD. And so I spent a couple weeks doing an outline, and then I sat down and I completely deviated from it immediately the first day. And I was like, oh, I just wasted all this time. And now I have a deadline, and I just wasted all this time with this outline. So it just didn't work for me. I guess that maybe I should try it again. It didn't. That was a while back, and it just didn't work for me that time. But I really love the book that I wrote. So then I thought, well, this is just not for me. But I have friends that swear by it. And I have friends that write outlines that are really detailed to the point where they're like 20,000 words already in, and then they just kind of go in and fill in where they need to. And they completely believe in that process. So I think it's just whatever happens for you, whatever works the best for you. If you can get that book done, I guess whatever method. But I've never really run into a situation where I painted myself into a corner, which I know that can happen if you don't have a plan for the end. I've been surprised more times than not about who's the actual killer is, because I don't know going in. So that's kind of fun. And then you just have to kind of go back and make sure it all makes sense and weave it all together. But yeah, I don't really have an idea. I have a spark of an idea for short stories. I just sort of like, oh, well, usually it's for me, it's like, wouldn't that be funny if someone like died in a, a pool and there was nobody around? Like who would, how would that work, kind of thing? That's how I sort of ask myself a bunch of questions and then kind of come up with a plot after that. But that's how I go about it. No plan, freeform.
So Sean, I have a question. Do you think it helped you at all to write an outline? Like, even if you deviated from it, do you think it helped you? Like in your mind, did that help you kind of congeal some ideas or
But
go
probably
with certain plot lines, or
yeah,
do
it
you know what I
probably
mean?
did. Yeah, it probably did help me set up some kind of framework. So at least by that point, I knew what I was supposed to be doing. Even if I didn't do it, an idea of like how the house was supposed to be built instead of just throwing, pieces of wood on a platform, which is, I guess, the way I would normally be doing it. But yeah, I think it does help to have some kind of idea of where you're going.
Yeah.
However that comes to be a structure for you, But
Yeah.
sitting down and doing a completely detailed outline with character arcs and stuff like that, I've never done that because I just don't know that I could. But I think it's great when people can, because I don't feel like they have much less stress in their lives than I do, if that makes sense. They're less freaked out.
I think it does. Like my first book, I wrote it in, grim detail. It was just so long and so involved, and it was, 1 A, B, C, 2. It was like an actual outline, and I wrote the book longhand, so it was just crazy how long it took me to do this book. And then the second one, I'm like, I'm never doing that again. So I just wrote by the seat of my pants the entire time. And now, like, that I've done this a few times, it's sort of somewhere in between. Like now I have an index card system where, each scene goes on an index card and they can be rearranged and put however I want them to be. And even then I deviate sometimes, but for me, so it like, I know what I want to accomplish in every scene, but how I get there, I don't write that down. So I kind of figure that out as I go along. But so it's a sort of a mixture of the two that ends up working for me.
Yeah, I think you need to find your own way. And that, do you think that first outline you did was a result of your being an attorney, like a legal person? Because I do a lot of editing for a lot of people, and I think attorneys tend to be like very specific and organized with their thoughts.
Yeah, like everything has to be logical and it has to be written down, and it's like it's so dry when you are writing legal documents. It's just painfully dry and boring. But that outlining, I think that just happens, and that's something I had to train myself not to do, because it was just too. And then like when I deviated from it, I was freaking out, and I said, I can't do this anymore. It was really too hard. So yeah, it was definitely the background that made me approach it that way, but it doesn't work. Like so much of my legal career just doesn't work for me anymore.
I had just the experience over the last 2 books, because the book that's coming out next month, A Serpent's Tooth, was supposed to come out in October. So I had a goal of getting a book out every 6 months. So I published one the previous October. I published one in April. I thought I'm on track to publish one in October of 2021. And so I fell under, so I had kind of outlined, I'm not even going to say outline, I'd kind of written out what I wanted the story to be. And I thought I had it sufficiently pinned down that I could start writing the details and the dialogue and all those, the parts that make it interesting. And I had so many cases of, what would be cooler, that just made me have to go through the whole manuscript again. So like a really minor example is that in the first story, one of the characters was pregnant, but not visibly pregnant. And then I realized it was going to be much cooler if she were almost ready to have her baby, which meant that I not only had to just change that, but I had to go through, and every place where she was first meeting someone, I had to have them notice that she was pregnant, because it kind of would, like, I had to bake it in through the whole thing. So, October came, November came, I'd sent it to my editor, a whole bunch of comments came back, and in fixing those, I had to like go through the whole thing all over again. And so I'm getting it out in April. It will have been a year rather than 6 months. And I thought, never again. Like, the quality is going to be just as good as my other books, but the pain I had to go through to get there was much more. And so I vowed never again. And for my sixth book, while during the two-week periods where my editor had book 5, I started what I call framing my sixth one, which was that I wrote it out present tense with no dialogue and no detail. So I might have a blurb that said, Anne finds out that from her brother that there's somebody who wants to hire her for an engagement. And I would write all that out. I used Scrivener, which is a software that many writers use. And you can write each chapter separately. So then if later you want to drag them around, you can do that easily. And I got about, when I was done with that, I had about 5,000 words. And then I went back and I started beefing it up a little bit. And I would say, Anne goes to the winery to talk to her brother, Mike, who has information about an engagement she has for a consulting engagement. And so I just kept making pass after pass and adding a little bit more detail, but also making the changes I felt like I needed to make, which resulted after several of those passes of having the crime, not only the bad guy, but the crime be completely different than I thought it was going to be, which is why I like the term frame. And I actually, there's going to be an article that I wrote in Writer's Digest later this year about the idea of framing, which is like framing a boat. Like you wouldn't start polishing the bright work before you had the frame in place. And it was exactly the same for me. With book 5, I was polishing the bright work before I had the frame in place, which is why I had to keep redoing the frame. And so I currently now have 30,000 words of present tense, no dialogue, little description that I can give to my editor and say, tell me if this makes sense. You know, if the character motivations are compelling, if the storyline makes sense. And once I've heard from an impartial professional third party that it does, then I'm going to go in and start adding all the fun detail that will make it engaging for the end reader, but doing that with the understanding that the frame, the foundation is in place to do that.
That's really cool. Interesting. I have a couple questions. Jenny asks, do you use the hero's journey in mind when writing? Sounds like Maddie does a bit, she wrote.
So my stories aren't the hero's journey so much, which I'm trying to resurrect my under my story study, but an event happens like Star Wars. An event happens, the hero is called to join in the event and pushes back and doesn't want to, but eventually is enticed to join the crusade and eventually wins. Mine is actually more an alternative, which I've heard of, called the heroine's journey. And I totally apologize if I'm getting this wrong because I'm resurrecting brain cells, but the heroine's journey, independent of what the gender of the protagonist is more a barrier is put up and the protagonist creates a community of people to address it. So it's less the like one person against the world, and it's more the group of people trying to overcome an obstacle. So if I'm understanding the question correctly, and if I'm remembering the hero's journey and heroine's journey definitions correctly, that would be more my approach, the heroine's journey.
Got it. Have you ever had writer's block? If so, for how long and how did you overcome it? Sean, do you want to address that?
I never have that, which I'm not sure why. And now that I said that, I want to knock wood and stuff. I don't know what had happened. How I started writing full time when I started my first book, I had an infant, and he did not sleep well. He was not a good sleeper. He sleeps like a rock now, but back then I was like, are you ever going to sleep? I mean, what are you doing? Why can't you sleep? I want to sleep all the time. Why can't you sleep? I loved him. I was not mad at him. He's a baby. So, but I would you can't, so I was rocking him and, just be up all night. And the way I put myself back to sleep or him, I just was think about the story. So I would tell myself the story in my head while I was doing those kinds of things and lulling myself back into sleep. And then you get up at weird hours because you're, exhausted and stuff. And I would just write down the thing I thought about the night before. And somehow I hung on to it. I don't know. But I would just tell myself the story basically to put myself back to sleep and try to put him back to sleep. But he wasn't falling for that. But yeah, that was how I did it. So I just kind of go to sleep the night before with whatever project I'm working on. And I don't do a lot of TV or whatever at night. I just kind of lay there and think about the story and tell myself what would happen next. And normally I hang on to it and then I get up the next morning and my brain is, I think while I'm sleeping, has worked out the next thing. And that's sort of how it goes for me. So I haven't run into that yet. I've had the sensation of not wanting to sit down and write today because I'm like, oh, I need to really reorganize my spice cabinet because that's really important right now. And I don't really, I will delay. I will delay writing because, just because for whatever, I don't know why, but I think it's a self-defense mechanism for like, I know I'm going to sit there for a couple of hours. Let me reorganize the spices and then I'll do that. So I do have that. I have that syndrome for some reason, but I've heard other writers say that they have that too. So it's not just me. But yeah, I have the cleanest pantry and spice rack of anyone because I do that before I write usually.
I definitely do that. Except I usually do a crossword puzzle. Like I'll do a crossword. That's like people say, what do you need? What's your writing routine? And they're like, I have a cup of tea and I have my pencil in the right in front of my computer and I have my muse or whatever sitting on my desk. And then I start to write. Or they say, a certain song comes on and that's my trigger to write. And so I sit down at my desk to write and that's my trigger to do a crossword puzzle. It's how it works for me. And then after I've done a puzzle or two, then I'm ready to write. And I don't know, it's so I don't get writer's block per se, but I do get like life block where life just gets in the way sometimes and you can't ignore how messy your spice drawer is or whatever, or your pantry or whatever, or the dog has to get walked. And so I do that. But I kind of always have that story going on in my head. And I think it does play out in your your subconscious by sometimes when, suddenly you've let it percolate for a while and all of a sudden you have the answer that you needed or the direction that you need to go in. And it works pretty well, I think, to take a step back sometimes, when you're kind of wondering what to do next. But yeah, writer's block, especially lately, it seems like there's been a lot of debate over whether writer's block is really a thing, or I don't know. It seems like every time I read a newsletter or, open an email from a writer, there's all this conversation about writer's block and whether it's really a thing that exists. And I think it does, but probably not as often as some people think it does, because I do think your mind is always working on it.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I think that there's nothing better than having a plot dilemma in your mind as you're going to sleep. And oftentimes I find that I wake up with the answer. And I would say I don't generally have writer's block, but I do have, I think what you guys are talking about, which is more getting myself away from other things. And for me, it's the admin side of my publishing business, that it's so easy to think, oh, I'll just answer these 3 more emails, or, I better check to see what, the bank balance is, or, all the administrative stuff that comes along with running a publishing imprint. It's, I always have to remind myself to stop doing that. And I do have a daily, almost daily sprint with 2 fellow authors, 12:30 to 2 every day. And so I try to make that the switching point. I can do all that other stuff, the admin stuff, the marketing, the promotion, all that kind of thing until 12:30. But at 12:30, I really need to switch to writing fiction. And, I can't claim that I'm always good about that. But I do find that once I get myself into fiction writing mode, then it's often very productive. I'll run into one of those plot dilemmas and it's not quite done that I can go to bed and sleep on it. But my house is probably never cleaner than when I'm doing one of those things, because I'll think, I'm not just going to sit here and stare at the screen. I'm going to go vacuum the floor. And oftentimes in the middle of vacuuming, I'll think of what I need to do. So yeah, I think slightly different flavors of sort of the same approach and same dilemmas.
Yeah, great solutions have come to me while doing laundry or dishes.
Exactly.
Oh,
Yeah.
That's it. That's the thing I was trying to think of.
Yes.
It's just like your brain, you give yourself a break and then it comes to you. So.
Yeah.
Do dishes if you need to think about stuff, just do dishes.
come up with a murder weapon while you're putting away the cutlery.
Right. Yeah. This meat cleaver.
I have another question for you from Claire. How do you feel about the approach of writing a trilogy or some set number with an arc and resolution? I've read several and particularly note Louise Penny's first 9 in the Three Pines series. That's from Claire. Who wants to?
I haven't written any trilogies, but I love reading them from other writers. I think that's a very cool concept to have, a 3-part story. My mom was a big Lord of the Rings fan, so I had those books growing up, and that was really neat to me that he had that sort of mapped out kind of thing. Mine are 7 because that's what the contract I got was to write. So I just sort of, I have to make 7 be a thing because that's how many books I'm contracted for. But every book I did try to move their relationships forward of the main set of characters, and that's just sort of how I handled it. But it could have been at any time they renewed that, so I didn't really have an end point in mind when I sat down with the series. I didn't know how long it was going to be or will be or whatever. So for me, no. Long answer, no, I haven't done that.
When I wrote I have 3 standalones with my publisher, and then I have a 3-book Gothic series. And what I did, because I wasn't sure like if I was going to be contracted for, another book after each book in the series, I did one character in the first book and made her sister the main character in the second book and made her cousin the main character in the third book, so that there wasn't necessarily each of the 3 characters were present in all 3 books, but it allowed me to kind of move with each woman, kind of focus differently on each woman in each book. So if I told the other panelists this before we started, but I am at a banquet for my son who just became an Eagle Scout, and apparently they're having dinner already. Thank you. So I was just brought a plate of so much. I've got green beans here, and I have what looks like roast beef with some gravy.
Oh no, I'm jealous.
There's ziti, I think, and a potato, 2 giant rolls. It is a carb fest, it looks like. So anyway, when you see people coming in and out, and I'm saying no, that's what's going on here. So I'm sorry. Anyway, so that's how I worked on the Gothic series, the cozy series that I'm writing. That I did sit down and map out each book. Like, here's where the relationship is going to be at the end of book 1, and here's where it's going in book 2. And by the end of book 7, I'm going to wrap it all up. And then the historical mystery books that I write, I call it a collection, not a series, because there is no character arc. There are no characters that are in each book. Each book, the only thread that connects these books is their setting, which is in and around Cape May, New Jersey. So throughout, history, Cape May's history. So.
Yeah, the trilogy that I wrote is the Lizzie Ballard thriller trilogy, and I did not realize that was going to be a trilogy when I started. But I got to the end of the first book and I realized that I couldn't really stop there, and it did coincidentally take 2 more books to finish it up. So there did end up being an overarching story arc, but unlike the approach I described earlier, I didn't have it all planned out ahead of time. It just serendipitously worked out that way. But interestingly, on my podcast, The Indie Author, I recently interviewed Edwin Hill, who writes the Hester Thursby mysteries, among others. And he said he always wants to think in terms of 3, and that the next time he was negotiating a contract with his publisher, he would always try to make the contract be for sets of 3 books, because he just thinks that's both creatively kind of how he thinks, and also business-wise, it's a sensible way of grouping together books. And I think if I ever went back to the Lizzie Ballard thriller, I mean, I wrapped up that storyline, that story arc in 3 books. But if I went back, I think I would try to have 3 books in mind for another set of a second story arc for that set of characters.
Another question for you, Maddie. Can you talk more about why you initially write in present tense? Doesn't it really influence plot development? That's from an attendee.
Yeah, so it's really sort of just a trick to keep me in a framing mindset, not a, I'm not even sure what what the opposite of the framing mindset is. Keep me away from all the details. So the only difference is that I'm writing Anne meets with her brother Mike about a potential new sensing engagement, as opposed to Mike met with her brother about a potential new sensing engagement. So I can convey the same information, but somehow writing it in present tense is just a different mindset for me. The other thing is I use a different font. So I use the sans serif font to write my frame, and I write a serif font to write, what becomes the final manuscript. And it's really just mind tricks to keep me focused, not letting myself wander off into dialogue and description, which are the downfalls I ran into with my 5th book, but just keeping me focused on getting the plot really pinned down.
Thank you. Okay, this is from Deb. Maddie, when will your next Anne Kineer and Liz Ballard come out? Amy, go ahead. Go with Maddie, and then
I was just going to say the 5th Anne Kineer novel will come out next month. It's A Serpent's Tooth. Number 5 will be out next month. And no Lizzie Ballard books imminent.
Okay. Again from Deb. Amy, will there be another Libraries of the World mystery?
I hope there will, but I don't know when that will be. I've written the Libraries of the World mystery. If you haven't heard of it, you probably haven't heard of it. There's only one book out. The idea was to write a series where the collections of different famous libraries throughout the world are used in committing or solving a crime in the present day. And so my first book was called Trudy's Diary in the Libraries of the World Mystery series. And it was how a woman's diary from the Nebraska territories in the mid 1800s was connected with a modern day murder in Washington, D.C.
Nice.
I loved writing this book. I loved the book. It is a really, really hard series to write, and I don't know why that is. It may go back to that historical research, but I'm not sure. And I use the dime novel collection at the Library of Congress as a springboard to solving the crime. So the second book this is a long way of answering Deb's question. I've written about half of the second book in the series, which takes place at the New York's Public Library, the main branch of the New York Public Library on 42nd and 5th Avenue. And it's really interesting to me, and I really have enjoyed writing it so far, but I got bogged down and sort of pulled in different directions with other books that eventually I hope to get back to that one. Because I'd like to think I didn't write half the manuscript for nothing, but hopefully I will get back to that, but it's not in the foreseeable future, not this year, certainly.
Thank you. And Sean, Deb asks, will there be another red carpet catering? I think there's 7, right?
There's 7, yeah. Well, I'm not sure. So the publisher of the first 7 has stopped publishing. So they are not publishing anymore, anybody. So, but they still have all the books and the rights and things. So there's an 8th one written, but it would have to find a new home, or they would have to change their minds or whatever. So right now we're sort of in limbo with that. But yeah, I'm not sure. I've moved on to other projects since then. So I'm working on Domestic Suspense Standalone, and I have a new idea for a new series that I've been working on, and I have a new agent, so she's very excited about the new series. So we'll see what happens with that. But I'm sort of like in a transitional period with the novels at this point. So it might be the end. We don't know. It just depends. But I I publish 3 or 4 short stories a year. So that's very fun to do the short stories, because I can sort of write whatever I want to. And my most recent short story came out in the CWA anthology in England. And that was very exciting because I was in there with like Anne Cleves and Ragnar.
Wow.
Oh,
So just
I
really
think
enjoyed-
I just read
Gosh.
that. I just got that. Is that the one that has the Anne Cleves thing that's set at Malice Domestic?
Music of the Night, the one about music. I don't know if her story.
No, I just got a CWA anthology, and the first story was by Anne Cleves, and it was about her. It was about her protagonist going to Malice Domestic. It was a riot. Everybody has to read it. It's very funny, especially if you like mystery, or if you're like a mystery fan. If you've ever been to a mystery fan or writers conference, you must read that.
Yes, she's great, and she has been to a lot of Malices. So that might be the one before. I was in that one too. So that was very cool. So the short story world has been nice to me. And that's where I've sort of been able to stay current and, relevant publishing and things like that until I've resettled on a new novel plan. So, but yeah, long answer. No, again.
All right. Well, we are getting close to the top of the hour. I have maybe a quick last question for you. I'm curious, when you say about ideas, do you have like a notebook, or like, do you write down ideas that you keep somewhere? Like, and how do you weave those into your books? Or are they like story ideas for a story, or just ideas about little tidbits?
I have a couple different ways I save things. So if I read an article that kind of sparks an idea for me, I have a private Pinterest page, and I'll just Pinterest pin it in there. And there's like 100 things in there. I go through different articles, and not specifically about crime or anything. It's just like, oh, the person, developed a new recipe or kitchen thing, and, then somebody tried to steal it from them. I'm like, oh, that's a cool idea for a story. So just things like that I'll stick in there, or just things that inspire me. So I have a private board in Pinterest. Hopefully Pinterest doesn't go away, because that's where I keep that stuff. And then if I just have like a random, I know, because I'm like, oh, we're no longer using TikTok. I'm like, oh, okay, well, there's all my stuff. So if Google goes away, then I'm screwed, because everything I have is in Google. So I have Google Keep as well, which is like a little note thing on my phone. So I'll just like type, and sometimes I go back in there and I'm like, why did I think Keith Richards, medical induced coma was a good idea? Because I'll read stuff from like, I'm like, what was I thinking that day? Was I drunk when I wrote this? Maybe. So I have Google Keep, and it's very entertaining, because sometimes I don't remember what I was thinking, but it's just random thoughts from my weird brain that go in there. So I keep it on me. But I do, if I'm working actively on a story, I may have a notebook that I'm jotting notes in. But if I'm just on the fly, picking up my kid from school, I'll just Google Keep some weird Keith Richards idea and see if I remember it later. So I do.
Anybody else want to jump in?
I just have bits and pieces of paper and receipts and napkins and whatever. I work now in my daughter's room. One of my oldest lives in Manhattan now, so I got her bedroom as my office, and she came home this weekend and she's like, oh my God, I can't believe what this room looks like, because there's just stacks of stuff everywhere. And I try to have like one stack for ideas, but they're in every notebook I have. And these are notebooks where I take notes on courses or take notes on other books. And, occasionally I'm just reading through these notes and I come across story ideas, and it's totally disorganized and not a smart way to do it at all. I need to get Google Note.
Yeah, in terms of ideas, like overarching ideas for a story, I seem to be on a schedule that I get an idea for an overarching story idea like once every 6 months. So it works out great, because, for example, for the book that's coming out next month, Serpent's Tooth, it's based on an experience I had going to a place called the Threesome Toll Booth, which isn't as weird as it sounds like maybe on the surface, with my husband. Mm-hmm. After this, people should Google Threesome Toll Booth, New York City. It's a tiny bar in New York City where it's you, your date, and the bartender for an hour. And we did that a number of years ago at this point, but that experience was so fascinating to me. I knew I wanted to write a book about it. And then book 5 came up, and I realized that was like, now is the time that I can write this. So I had this idea for a tiny bar that I wanted to bake into the book. And then I had the Scrivener file that I mentioned before, and I can put notes in there about things that I think I might want to use in the story, ideas for like bits or subplots or something like that. And then usually what happens is that while I'm working on that, something else is percolating along. And I'm sensing a trend here, because the Anne Kineer 6, which is the one that I was framing while the editor had Anne Kineer 5 twice, is that I went to some friends of mine have a condo in Ocean City, Maryland, and they graciously let me go stay there. And I was there in off season. There was nobody else there. And there's really nothing creepier than being in a giant condo building. And you're honestly, I might have been the only person in the whole condo building in November or whenever it was. And I found it so fascinating. I thought, I'm going to write a story that's set in a condo building in Ocean City, Maryland off season. And I kind of had an idea for what I wanted to write about. So I have the big chunky ideas only periodically, and I usually let them, this is one of these going to bed, like it's the scene playing through my mind before I fall asleep. And then, but then the little details that I want to use, I generally store in this software called Scrivener.
Well, I just want to thank you all. We are at 4:00. And thank you, Sean, Maddie, Amy, for joining us for this discussion. It was really interesting, and I have got lots more questions, so we'll have to do this again sometime. Just so everybody knows, this is recorded. It will be on YouTube, and we will have links to the authors' websites, as well as the Mechanicsburg Mystery Bookshop. And again, special thanks to Deb Beamer from the bookshop for helping organize this. Have a wonderful afternoon, everybody. Thank you again for joining us.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
Natalie.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
Deb.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.